In last week's video, we talked about how rock or slope movement often begins in areas where friction or cohesion is weakest, and how those small movements can produce early signs, sometimes long before full failure occurs. This week, we're focusing on some of the early warning signs that the rock mass or slope stability is changing and what they might look like. Today, we will talk about 4 subtle signs that something might be shifting in the ground around you. 1. Cracking. Even small, fresh cracks forming across the surface can indicate that the ground is beginning to deform. These cracks often reflect that tensile stresses are developing below the surface, either from stretching, differential movement, or the early stages of slope or structural instability. It's an early sign that the rock or soil mass is under stress and may be starting to move. 2. Rockfalls or fresh rock exposure. When small rocks begin to fall or detach from areas that were previously stable, especially when they reveal lighter, unweathered rock beneath, it suggests that movement has already occurred. If this starts happening repeatedly in a localized zone, it becomes a key indicator that the ground conditions are actively changing, and that stress redistribution or loss of confinement may be underway. 3. The sudden appearance of water. Water turning up in places it wasn't seen before can point to changes in the rock mass. It might mean permeability has increased, pressure has shifted, or fractures have opened. 4. Finally, the sudden appearance of dust without obvious cause. If dust is puffing out from a surface, or appears mid-shift with no activity nearby, it may be the result of internal movement, the rock breaking or shifting out of place just below the surface. None of these signs mean that failure is guaranteed, but they do mean conditions are changing. They're the cues that friction has, or is being overcome, cohesion is weakening, and the system is trying to find a new balance, often by moving. That's why we watch for these signals closely, because in many cases, they're the first visible signs of an area that's beginning to fail. Now, let's step through those 4 signs one at a time, starting with cracking. Cracking is one of the most visible early signs of ground movement, but it's not always obvious what kind of crack you're looking at. In competent rock, new cracks or visible widening of existing ones are often easy to spot, especially near benches, road edges, or slope crests. But some cracks are more subtle. On surface haul roads, small tension cracks can be mistaken for mud cracks or joints. The key difference? Mud cracks tend to form an anastomosing pattern, that is, a network of irregular interwoven cracks. In contrast, failure-related cracks that aren't related from mounds of dirt or mud being pushed up from tires often appear as lines or semicircle shapes that increase over time, and they tend to extend or link along a developing path of movement. Also, a visual inspection tip for cracking that isn't being actively monitored is cracks that haven't increased in width or changed for a while may show signs of dust or dirt build up along the crack. If there has been fresh movement, this is unlikely to be there. If you're unsure and you've reported your concerns to the geotechnical engineer, I have a practical tip for you. Spray paint the cracks as you find them. Then, report your concerns to the geotechnical engineer and check the area regularly when you work there. If new cracks appear, paint those in a different color. This simple method allows you to track crack progression over time, showing you whether the ground is continuing to move, and if the failure surface is evolving. Next, let's look at rockfalls. Often, when a rock falls or breaks, it exposes a lighter, unweathered surface. This can also be a clear sign the material hasn't been exposed long, especially when surrounded by dusty, darker rock, meaning that fresh movement has occurred where the non-dusty, clean rock is exposed. This is even more critical when these small falls happen repeatedly in the same zone. That pattern tells us something is shifting. It suggests that stress is being redistributed and confinement is being lost, or a failure surface may be developing behind the visible face. These are not just surface disturbances. They're active ground responses to changes, sometimes deeper failures. So, in simple terms, if it's falling where it never used to fall, something has changed, and it's time to pay attention. That includes noticing even small rocks that have dislodged. And remember, in competent rock, even if the loose rocks have already been cleaned up by graders or scaling crews, the signs of disturbance don't just disappear. Look for fresh, clean, or non-dusty rock faces, especially where the surrounding area is weathered or covered with dirt or dust. This may appear as distinct color contrasts in the areas where rock has recently detached. Also look for newly visible cracks or voids that weren't present in earlier inspections. These subtle cues are just as important as the rockfall itself, because they show you where movement has happened, even if the debris is gone. So it's not just about looking for rocks that have fallen down, it's just as much about looking for changes in what is still there. Water always follows the path of least resistance, which means it will often emerge through fractures, weak zones, or low confinement areas in the rock mass. When this happens, you might see a small trickle turning into a flowing stream, a confined damp patch that keeps reappearing in the same location, or fresh seepage running down walls or out of backfill. Now, in many cases, if water behavior hasn't changed, it may not be a concern, especially if it's part of known drainage or expected inflows. But if water suddenly appears in an area where it wasn't present before, or if there's a noticeable change in the flow rate, meaning it increases or decreases, both of those scenarios indicate there's a change. And any change in ground behavior, especially involving water, is something worth reporting to the geotechnical engineer. Because water is often a trigger. It can reduce cohesion, increase pore pressure, and weaken rock bridges, all of which can contribute to instability. To understand how water pressure affects the ground, think of the human body. If you drink a lot of water and don't take a bathroom break, you'll start to feel that pressure build up inside. Eventually, the moment there's a path of least resistance, that water is going to find a way out. The same thing happens under the surface of the ground. Water builds pressure inside rock masses, especially when it's confined and has nowhere to go. Once it finds a weakness, a fracture, joint, or soft zone, it will move through it. And just like in the human body, that internal pressure can be enough to force movement or a release. In rock, this means reduced cohesion, higher pore pressure, and a much greater chance that things could shift or fail, especially if the rock was already nearing instability. So when water suddenly appears where it wasn't before, it might not just be wet ground. It could be a sign that the stabilizing properties within the rock mass or slope may have changed. In both underground and surface mines, the sudden appearance of dust, especially when there's no nearby traffic, drilling, or blasting, can be a warning sign. Underground, it might be the sudden appearance of dust or noticeable increase in the amount of dust in the air when you're away from all moving traffic or potential sources. In hard rock mines, this could also be accompanied by a faint sound on some occasions, like a pop or crack. This can happen when rock is beginning to move or break, often as stress redistributes in the ground. On surface slopes, you might notice swirls of dust lifting from a face or bench, even on a still day. This can be caused by sudden displacement or sloughing as the slope subtly adjusts or fractures beneath the surface. What's important here is context. If you see dust where there was none before, and there's no activity to explain it, treat it as a visible sign that the ground may have shifted, especially if it's not a windy day. It's subtle, it's easy to miss, but in many cases, the sudden appearance of dust can be one of the first signs that conditions are changing. So, in summary, what you're looking for are signs that something has changed. Even small changes, like new cracks, fresh rock exposure, sudden damp patches, unexpected dust, or rock noise, might mean that cohesion and friction are reducing and the balance in the ground has started to shift. Although, of course, these signs don't always mean something is about to fail. Sometimes it's just a wet or windy day, a water cart's been through, or a few rocks dropped off a truck. But at the same time, sometimes those signs are telling you that the rock mass or slope around you is starting to change. All you have to do is look and check. If you're not sure, or if you are concerned, simply report it to the geotechnical engineer. That's it for this week's video. Thanks again for joining us. And as always, we hope you'll come back next week. Stay safe, stay alert, and keep looking for the signs of changing conditions.